Welcome to the Skull King Football Podcast, presented by Fox DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin and Ryan Skullrood.
Hello and welcome back to the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullrood. I am the founder of Skull King Football. I want to welcome you to the podcast tonight. And as we made the special announcement in our last podcast, to join me tonight, who will become now as regular part of the show as he can with his schedule, Skull King staff writer for quarterbacks, Greg Talcott. Go ahead and say hi, Greg.
Hey, Ryan. Hello, everybody. Good to be back again this week.
All righty. Well, we are moving into week 10. We've hit the double digits in the fantasy football weeks. Oh, by the way, this is actually special podcast. This is podcast number 25 for us, so we're making our way up there. So yeah, we've hit week 10. I know that there are a lot of people that are out of it. I have one league that it's pretty much a given. Actually, two of my 5 leagues, it's pretty much a given that thanks to underperforming players and injuries, I'm pretty much done in 2 of my 5 leagues already. So I don't know how you're doing in your – I think you said you're pretty much out of it in your league.
Yeah, so this week in my league, it was a riveting matchup between a couple of 2-win teams, myself and another guy battling for dead last. And I like to report that because of Jimmy Graham, I am officially now in dead last.
Alrighty. Yeah, see, I'm in all of mine, I'm just on the edge where I need to win out in order to make the playoff, in order to have a shot at making the playoffs. And so, yeah, I pretty much just have counted those teams out. So, alrighty. Well, why don't we go ahead and get into the news and notes? We've got more injury stuff to take care of, but let's go ahead and get into this and see what we can do to help out people for week 10. All right, started off. Close out of that. Close out. There we go. Come on, Sleeperbot. There we go. The Tampa Bay Times says it was too early to tell if Doug Martin with his hamstrings would be cleared to play in week 10 following Wednesday's practice. So if you have, Peyton Barber, you're still in good shape. For me, I still don't think Doug Martin's going to play this week. I think he may play maybe 2 or 3 games the rest of the season. But I don't trust running backs with hamstring injuries. I don't know about you, Greg, but
I would agree with you. I mean, I wasn't high on Doug Martin coming into this year. I mean, he seemed like that typical case of a great performance in the contract year, and you're going to get a handful of nothing, the following year. And Chicago's not chopped defense on the run, or chopped liver, on the run defense either. They're number 12 in the league overall right there. So I don't think he's a great matchup as his first game back, either way.
Yeah. Next, head coach Mike McCarthy, this I thought has called Ty Montgomery a 3-down back on Wednesday. Rob Dombrowski of ESPN.com reports, I think you have to get past the fact that he wears number 88. McCarthy added he's 225 pounds and he's physical. I mean, with the way that they're using him, yeah, I guess you could call him an every down back. I mean, he's getting some carries. He's definitely taking advantage with those carries, but he's mainly being used as a pass catcher out of the backfield. Do you think that once Stark, because I know that James Starks is coming back, he started practicing again. How much do you think James Starks cuts into Ty Montgomery's workload?
I think it's certainly detrimental, to have Starks come back, especially as you get later into the season. I mean, you've seen this with Starks really the last few years, where he's a late season performer. He's dealt with injuries before, but he tends to come back and play well. So, assuming he's healthy, I think he gets more carries. That can only be a negative for a guy who's ultimately then at that point he's like your number 4 receiver. So I think he's still a great option for flex play, or where you're really desperate to be able to play a running back, because you can play him in both spots. Like I am. I mean, my running backs are just getting worse as we actually speak. So I'm not knocking him that much. He could be a play there, but you can't look at a healthy body coming back in the backfield like Starks with experience and think that it has any potential upside for Montgomery.
Yeah, and like you said, officially now starting today, which for us is Wednesday, Ty Montgomery on Yahoo can be used as both a wide receiver and a running back. So that is good. I know that's good news for a lot of people. It is for me in one of my leagues. So, all right, Todd Gurley did not practice on Wednesday with a thigh issue. I mentioned in the last podcast that Jeff Fisher stated that Todd Gurley needs to get more carries. I was like, you're the head coach. That's kind of your job to get your star player more carries. But he's not practicing today. Who does LA have? They have, let me scroll. They're at the New York Jets, who, I mean, they're not terrible against the run. So Todd Gurley could be in a little bit of trouble even if he does play on Sunday.
The Jets are number 5 overall in rush defense, and Gurley, there's a lot of disappointing performance coming out of first-round picks, but there's probably nothing as disappointing as Todd Gurley, who, is the number 1 or number 2 back taken, top 5, player put, possibly, in most drafts this year. So going up against a number 5 defense, he's not going to get anything. His yards per carry are terrible, and the Jets give up 3.5.
Yeah. So, all right, Spencer Ware has officially passed the league's concussion protocol, and all those who had Spencer Ware, start, thanking their lucky stars that he is finally available again. Because, I mean, I think we've pretty much seen now that Spencer Ware is the superior talent to Charkandrick West. And we saw, West performed last year admirably for a few games, and then after those 3 games, Ware took over the role, especially as being like the lead pounding back, and West was more the kind of the pass catcher. But even this year, Ware has been basically doing it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he is easily taken that job. He is the number 1 there. Again, when you look at matchups this week, how excited are you to see Carolina, who's number 3 against the run, and giving up 3.3 yards a carry.
Yeah.
So it's another one of these things where when you get guys coming back from injury or they haven't necessarily been performing well, and then you throw them up against a stacked defense, you're not really stacking the deck in your favor for that week, I would say.
No, not really. But still, he's a better option than Charkandrick West is for that match.
Oh, that's without question.
No, I'm not worried. Randall Cobb was limited in Wednesday's practice. Here's just some various notes. Randall Cobb was limited in Wednesday's practice. He's kind of still dealing with the hamstring injury. He didn't suffer any major setbacks in the game on Sunday in the loss to Indianapolis. So I think that this is more just a precautionary thing. Moving on, Hunter Henry was limited in Wednesday's practice with his knee. Man, he's kind of fallen from grace a little bit. It looks like now that Antonio Gates is fully healthy. Since Antonio Gates came back, he is now leading the league in red zone targets in like the last 4 or 5 weeks. Gates is.
The guy's just a timeless wonder. Every time you think you've written the guy off, I mean, he's there again.
Yeah,
really remarkable.
I mean, I drafted him this year, figuring that he was going to have a great season. Then when he went, when he got injured, and my team's got a little thin at tight end, I really didn't have much of a choice but to drop him and move, go somewhere else. And by the time he was actually back and and being productive, he was gone. Someone else already had him. So Travis Benjamin didn't practice Wednesday. He is actually, from what I've seen. Some of the stories I've seen, he's actually trending to not playing on Sunday against Miami, which would make Tyrell Williams basically the only wide receiver option for Rivers in that game against Miami. Here we go. Mike Evans' concussion was a full participant at Wednesday's practice. It looks like he's basically now to the point where he should be out of the concussion protocol either tomorrow or the day after and ready to go.
Yeah, and he's got he's got a good matchup this week against the Bears, as well. So owners of Mike Evans are definitely happy this week.
Yeah, I have one league where I have Matthew Stafford, where I think I actually picked up Jameis Winston because I have Mike Evans, just to kind of try to double up on points and take advantage of the fact that I want to say that in that specific league, that scoring that I have, Chicago is giving up the most fantasy points to wide receivers. So I should be in for an okay week there. Coach Pete Carroll said CJ Prosise is going to play, quote, a lot this week against New England. I'm not surprised by this. Thomas Rawls is not going to be back this week in Week 10. They're expecting, they're hoping he'll be back in Week 11. Christine Michael had some good games early after Rawls went out, but for the most part has been a disappointment. He has not been breaking tackles. You watch him try to run through the line, and it's like he's trying so hard to break through tackles to get through the line that he basically trips himself up, and as soon as he's through the line, he's stumbling and falling down for only a gain of like 4 yards. With his speed, he should be breaking through the line and running for 25. So
right. I don't know that there has been a more impactful retirement or personnel change on any team than Marshawn Lynch being gone, from Seattle. And I think that you got to give Prosise a chance, especially, this week against New England. I mean, the last thing you want to go do is go on the road and try to throw it around against Belichick and Brady, because you're going to get run off the field pretty quick. And so if they can possibly control the ball and the clock, they have a chance of keeping the game competitive this week.
Yeah, I mean, as a Seahawks fan, I can't even say that I'm worried about the New England game. I really don't like that matchup because of how bad the offense has been the last 3 weeks and how much. I still think that Seattle has a solid defense. The problem is the offense can't stay on the field to give the defense a break. And if they keep that up, if they're only playing, if the offense only has the ball 20 to 22 minutes out of the 60 in New England, they're just going to be throwing the ball all over, and the defense is going to stay on the field. The Seattle's defense is going to stay on the field the entire game, and it's going to be an absolute blowout.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's a tough matchup for anybody to go up against New England, especially on the road. But right now, this is a tough draw for Seattle this week.
Yeah. Good. Moving on next, Carlos Hyde still has remained limited at practice with his shoulder injury. He was still seen with a non-contact jersey in practice today. A lot of people are still somewhat high on DeJuan Harris with the game that he had this last week. It was against New Orleans in a game that, New Orleans isn't all that great on defense. Obviously they put up a ton of numbers on offense, but I'm still. I was not a believer in Hyde all season, even going into the draft, just because I thought he would get injured and then wouldn't be able to come back. I don't like DeJuan Harris in this game against Arizona, because I'm pretty sure it's against Arizona. Mm-hmm. So if Carlos Hyde is out, you need to look somewhere else for your running backs. I wouldn't be going to San Francisco this week.
No, DeJuan Harris is a body to plug a hole in the roster because you can't find anybody else to start, which is likely what I'll be doing this weekend. But ultimately Arizona is the middle of the pack. Run defense. They give up less than 4 yards a carry. San Francisco's defense is so historically bad that they're going to be getting, unless Arizona does what they've done this year, which is just completely disappoint on offense. Arizona should have a massive, massive lead in that game, and you're going to put more and more pressure on Kaepernick, and you're not going to be running the ball anyway.
Correct. All right, moving on. Lamar Miller, still with his shoulder injury, was limited at Wednesday's practice. He has a somewhat, he's got Jacksonville. I want to say they're in Jacksonville this week.
Mm-hmm.
Jacksonville's defense has struggled as well. They're not lighting the world on fire with their defense. They have, let's be honest, they have a young core that's still trying to figure it out. They're right about the middle of the pack in terms of yards. Yeah, they're number 20 in yards allowed, rush yards. So I could see if Lamar Miller is healthy, he should be fine for this weekend. And honestly, if Houston's going to win, they obviously cannot put the ball in Osweiler's hands and expect to do well.
Yeah, Brock Osweiler is really one of the more disappointing picks that I had going into this year. Not that he's on my team, but what I expected him to do. And for a guy who's 6'8", he is remarkable at not being able to see the field. I mean, Doug Flutie, could see the field 100 times better and get the ball out where the Brock Osweiler can.
And was almost a full foot shorter.
Oh, easily a foot shorter. So it's really definitely going to be on Miller's shoulders. I mean, it's a solid enough matchup, I think, against Jacksonville. If you do get any points, maybe he can get a short yardage touchdown, something like that. It's not going to be a high scoring game, I wouldn't think, because really neither offense is playing great, and Houston does have a solid defense. So I think Lamar Miller would be a good play this week.
Moving on, Jaquiz Rogers shed his walking boot, but still did not practice Wednesday. At this point, like we said earlier, it's still Peyton Barber. We don't know if Doug Martin's even going to be able to play, and if he does come back, it's not necessarily a great matchup going up against Chicago's run D. So, and I think that's about it. Jeremy Maclin did not practice today. He's looking questionable for the game this weekend that Kansas City has against Carolina, which is a shame because Carolina's pass defense is terrible. So if most of the reports that I've seen on Maclin is that he probably will not play this weekend. So, which puts a bit of a damper on Alex Smith coming back, but again, Alex Smith is another one of those. He's a streaming option only in a good matchup where you hope he gets the 225 to 250 and 2 touchdowns. So,
right.
And then I think that was it. Nope. Okay, and all the rest of that we're going into what we had last week. So. Or in the last podcast. So that pretty much wraps it up for our news and notes. We're going to go ahead and get into our DFS section for this week, week 10. Again, Greg, you and I, unfortunately live in states where we're not allowed to play DFS, but we can still put together the lineups. So we kind of went over what we were looking at for this week. And so for quarterback, you had, and we were both looking in the same range. We weren't necessarily looking for the high paid guys just because matchups weren't necessarily great. We were both looking middle of the road. So why don't you go ahead and give me a name or two that you were looking at for this week?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's not any real great plays in the high dollar range. And what seemed to be the sweet spot to me was that $30 space. And this week I'm going with Carson Palmer. I mean, it's just he's at home. He's going against a horrible defense. Now, he's played lousy all year. And so I think this is a turning point for the Cardinals and for Palmer. If you're going to get healthy and you're going to start playing well and get on a roll, this is the type of team that you're going to do it against. So he has the potential to have 300 plus and maybe 3 scores. I think in this game.
Okay, and then a name that I know that you say you will never be, you being a Chicago Bears fan, a name that you will never ever start is Jay Cutler. I actually like him for this week, simply as kind of that streaming option type that's could get you 250 and 2. He's going up against Tampa Bay's defense, where let's be honest, because of how inconsistent Chicago's pass defense has been, Mike Evans and Jameis Winston could go off in this game, which could mean that it could turn into a shootout, which with Jay Cutler could mean that he throws for 300 yards and 2 TDs, or it could mean that he throws for 225 and 3 interceptions. So, I mean, you're kind of picking your poison there, but at the $30 range, again, that's kind of where you're going anyways. So, the other name that you and I kind of talked about was Trevor Siemian at $26, just because of the matchup at New Orleans.
Yeah, I think that is actually a favorable matchup. I don't, Siemian on the season, I'm not, blown away by him. I think he gets a little too much credit, frankly, for the way some of the announcers talk about him, for what he's accomplished, especially when you compare it relative to like a Dak Prescott. I mean, they're both playing with some, quite a supporting cast around them, right? So it's not like, either guy's at a real disadvantage there. And when you look at production, Siemian doesn't blow me away. But this week on the road in New Orleans, who's got a lousy defense, they can score. The Raiders proved last week that you can put up points, on Denver. Denver, I think, is more vulnerable on defense than people want to really acknowledge. So they're going to be down in this game, and that's going to be on Siemian because Denver can't run the ball, at least not very well. Even though New Orleans is in a great defense, they're going to have to throw the ball. And so I think he's got more upside this week than a lot of other guys, especially for the money that they pay.
Yeah, at only $26. All right, let's move on to the wide receivers. Again, it seems like this week you and I, we'll go to the wide receivers. You weren't necessarily high on a lot of the high-end picks just because of matchups. For me, I kind of like the Alshon Jeffrey at $27, again, going against Tampa Bay. I know you're kind of being a Chicago Bears fan, and yet your disdain for the players on the Chicago Bears with Sir Drops-a-Lot Alshon Jeffrey. But I think the matchup plays pretty well to at least give an opportunity at $27 instead of maybe paying a little bit higher for, say, Antonio Brown, who has Dallas's defense at $35 that he's going to be going up against. So.
Yeah, I think especially if you're going with Cutler too. I mean, you do have the chance of getting the double dip there, and if there's not a lot of options for Cutler, to throw it to. I mean, he's got one guy, two guys, or it's a pick. So Alshon Jeffrey's always going to be right at that top of that list as far as targets. Hopefully they can put something together for you.
Yeah, and then. Who were maybe a couple of the wide receivers that you were looking at before I give one more?
Yeah, so I mean, I went with I was really cheap. I mean, my most expensive receiver this week was Michael Thomas with against Denver at home. So I believe that the Saints are going to score points. I don't really think that you stop their offense. Michael Thomas, with the injury to Talib, is drawing somewhere around your number 3 guy, your nickel corner. So he has a favorable matchup either way you look at that. So he would be my number 1 this week because I went really heavy on running backs.
Yeah, and he's $20. And then what was maybe one more wide receiver that you like?
So I went with Dez Bryant here. At $19 against Pittsburgh. I think that's for the ability that he has in any given week, that's a pretty darn good value. I mean, he hasn't, done anything great this year, certainly not worthy of where his ranking was coming into the season. But in a game like this is, I think, where you would more likely see him show up. And for $19, you're kind of hard pressed to beat that.
Yeah, I like that pick going up against Pittsburgh. Dallas does have I want to say an above average defense. Their defense is better than a lot of people think it is. And so but still it's at Pittsburgh. I think that Pittsburgh could put up a lot of points in this game simply because Ben Roethlisberger plays better at home. And so they could be throwing the ball around a bunch there, especially if they can manage to get Sammy Coates to hold on to the ball on the deep passes, and maybe convert 1 of 5 or 2 of 5 instead of 1 maybe of 5 long, deep passes to Sammy Coates. And I think if Pittsburgh manages to put up a lot of points, Prescott's going to have to throw the ball. And now that Des Bryant seems to be fully healthy, I think that's a good pick to go with there. So. The other one that I had was looking at was J.J. Nelson at only $18. Again, we were talking about matchups and how historically bad San Francisco's defense is. It's at home for Arizona against San Francisco. And J.J. Nelson, before the bye week, Bruce Arians had already announced that J.J. Nelson was a starting wide receiver, and as far as we could tell, had taken over Michael Floyd's role. Another candidate for the Sir Drops a Lot award. And so I like J.J. Nelson's matchup. He seems to be getting a pretty good rapport with Palmer. I want to say in the Carolina game he finished with 6 catches for 78 and 2 TDs, right around that area. And so for me, I like J.J. Nelson, again, at a value pick at only $18 against a really terrible defense.
Yeah, I think you're spot on right there with Nelson, and if there's going to be big play potential in this game, it's going to be through him. I actually did take Michael Floyd this week at $14, based on a similar premise around why I'm going with Palmer. If the Cardinals are going to turn around, and if they are going to make a run, Michael Floyd has to be a part of that. And he's the antithesis of the contract year performance you got from Doug Martin, and this is the worst contract year performance I think anybody's ever seen. It's like he does not know how to catch a football anymore, but the talent's there. So, I took him just on the deep discount, but I think J.J. Nelson is certainly the better play if you have the money.
I think the play for Michael Floyd that sticks out to me the most was the one in the getting in the fourth quarter of the Seattle Sunday night debacle, where both kickers missed the field goals in overtime, and the drive to get down where Catanzaro missed at the end of the fourth quarter, I want to say. On that drive, Michael Floyd had one as he was kind of backing up towards the line, towards the out of bounds, that hit him in the gut and bounced right out onto the ground. I was like, how do you miss? I mean, that it would have put him in perfect, would have saved him another 10 seconds, would have maybe given them one more play to maybe get another run to David Johnson closer to the end zone. So I mean, that play stuck out to me, and it's just, I can't believe really how bad, with all of the prognostications that Michael Floyd could take over Larry Fitzgerald's role as the top wide receiver in Arizona, he has been anything but. So.
Oh, and at this point, he's not getting re-signed by the Cardinals.
No.
And he's not getting big money anywhere else.
No, he won't.
So it's a good thing he went to Notre Dame.
All right, moving on to the running backs. Really, to start it off, is there anywhere else you can go other than David Johnson?
I don't know what you're looking at if David Johnson is not your big dollar spend for the week. I mean, he is going against the biggest, juiciest bullseye, any running back's going to see all season long. I mean, this should be Tecmo Bowl statistics that he puts up this weekend. So, bar none, the best play this week.
Yeah, I try not to, when I write up lines to help out some of the guys at Vox, and I mean, I try to kind of spread out, some players, try to get exposure to a whole bunch of players. Last week, I had Jimmy Graham in every single lineup I wrote, and I haven't done that before, and it paid off. This week, if I was going to pick a player to do that with, it would be David Johnson. Again, we're talking about a historically bad defense in San Francisco, who, let's see if I got it right here. How many yards are they're giving up? 193 rush yards a game. I mean, last week we were kind of, there was a debate, is it going to be Mark Ingram or Tim Hightower who's going to be, is the guy to own in that game against San Francisco? And it turns out both of them were. So, Ingram had over 100 yards. Hightower had over 100 yards. I mean, it was just this team again 193 yards a game. And David and then you've got the David Johnson who's averaging it's between him and Ezekiel Elliott all year who's going to end up being the leading rusher for the season, and it keeps going back and forth. So I mean, how do you not put David Johnson every single line?
Yeah, I mean, last week I thought it was a misprint when I saw him giving up 185 yards a game. This is 193. This isn't college football. With like the horrible defenses, they yield 900 yards a game on defense. I mean, this is the NFL. You're giving up 193 yards a game, and Johnson's might break 200 yards this week. The question is, are there enough balls to go around, and how much is Arians willing to run it up on San Francisco? And I think there are enough balls to go around, and Arians is willing to run it up. So I think you can still do well on both sides as far as through the air and on the ground. But if I'm weighing it out, you got to favor Arizona's run game this week versus even the passing game.
All right. So now that we've talked extensively about David Johnson, is there who's another guy that you're looking at for this week?
Well, it's one of the rare times that I'm actually going to point to a bright spot on the Chicago Bears, and that's with Jordan Howard. So I think at $27, Tampa Bay is no great shucks when it comes to defense, and Howard realistically has been about their best weapon this year, their best option. He's a really impressive player to watch, and the way he runs is something that I wasn't expecting coming into this season. If he's able to do that as a career, then I'm perfectly happy with the fact that we actually got rid of Matt Forte when we did, because I think he's a really talented player. And Tampa Bay, they're below the middle of the pack in defense on against the run. They're 21st overall. They give up 120 yards a game almost. So I think he's a good pick there.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. The other one that I was kind of looking at, we talked a little bit about Lamar Miller going up against Jacksonville. Jacksonville's defense is wrong one. Let's go to the defensive stats. There we go. They're number 20. They're giving up basically 117 yards a game. And like we said, the Houston Texans are not going to be able to win games leaning on Brock Osweiler. They have to give Lamar Miller the ball. And if he is healthy, I think he is a great guy to go with, as a guy maybe to pair up with David Johnson if you're going to spend high on your running backs, simply because of the matchup and the opportunity. He's going to have to be the guy. So
absolutely, no, I think that's definitely the right call.
Yeah, and if I was if I had to have a shot in the dark pick, if you're going to go cheap, again, we talked about CJ Prosise having a being used a lot in this next game. Him or maybe Tim Hightower for only $16 against the Denver defense, who they're number like you said, number 30 in the league in rush yards, giving up 128 a game. So.
And I think you have to go with that matchup. I think with Hightower there, I think it's good to see Prosise in there. I think he's a solid play overall, and maybe he helps solve Seattle's rushing issues. I'm going to pull for the Golden Gophers all the time, and I think watching him in college, he's a great back. So we'll see if he can actually solidify that position up there in Seattle. But otherwise, for the week, I go with Hightower against Denver.
All right, moving on to tight ends. Is there? Other than Gronk against the Seattle defense that historically has trouble guarding against tight ends, especially now, it looks like that Cam Chancellor will be back for this game. It'll be his first game activated after suffering the groin injury and being out for 4 weeks. I don't trust Cam Chancellor coming off injury to be able to guard Gronk. So, I mean, other than Gronk, who I think is probably an obvious play this week, is there someone else that you're looking at?
Well, I think that's a great point because it brings up the guy that I have this week in DFS, which is going to be Martellus Bennett on the other side of the field. So, you know that Gronk's going to always get the lion's share of the coverage, and I think that opens up things for Bennett. He's been a little bit inconsistent this season, but this is the type of matchup that I think he could really thrive for the exact reasons you just said.
All right. I like, for me, I think if I'm going to spend quote-unquote high at tight end, I mean, tight ends are usually right around that $21 to $25 range for your high-end guys. I like Delaney Walker against the Green Bay, non-existent pass defense. Delaney, I mean, Marcus Mariota has been able to throw the ball around pretty well the last few weeks. I mean, he did have a costly interception last game against, was it San Diego? I think for the most part, Delaney Walker is still the main pass-catching guy in Tennessee. He is the first option when it comes to passing for Mariota. So I'm always good to put Delaney Walker in my DFS lineups.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean that's a solid pick. He is the biggest weapon they really have, or the most consistent, I guess, as far as output is concerned on offense in the passing game. So it's a good value at $21.
And then if going value, I've told you this already. People are going to get sick of me saying this name over and over and over again. I've been saying it for 4 or 5 weeks now. CJ Fedorowicz at $15. Going up against Jacksonville again. Jacksonville is not. I want to say Jacksonville actually against tight ends is right around 10 to 12 in terms of giving up fantasy points on Yahoo. But CJ Fedorowicz has, again, we talked about Brock Osweiler and how pathetic, I guess, is the best way to put it, compared to expectations of what he was going to be able to do. He has not been able to get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins. Will Fuller hasn't exactly been healthy, and even when he was healthy, he was able to catch a couple of deep balls, but Fuller's stat line would be 10 targets, 4 catches for 120 yards. And so, just the lack of consistency from Osweiler, he has it when he's throwing short passes, and CJ Fedorowicz has been the recipient of that. I'll go over these stats one more time that I went over in our last show. Where was it? In the last 5 games, he's had 34 targets for 24 receptions, 272 yards, and 3 TDs. Over the same time, DeAndre Hopkins has had 24 receptions for 202 yards and no TDs. So I like Fedorowicz. He is the more productive guy. He's running more of the short routes that Osweiler can actually hit a little more accurately. And so that again, at $15 against a not very good defense in Jacksonville, I love that play. So, yeah,
I mean, Osweiler at captain checkdown is certainly plays into the performance of Fedorowicz, which, to be honest, I mean, who doesn't want to say CJ Fedorowicz every week? I mean, Zach Miller is not really a fun name to say, and CJ Fedorowicz is pretty cool, especially when he's doing well. And he's outperforming DeAndre Hopkins. And once you drop that stat, that's pretty much game, set, match.
So, all right. And let's go ahead and move on to defenses for this week. I don't know. I mean, I didn't do a whole lot of looking at defenses. Again, for DFS in general, it hasn't been, this week hasn't really seemed like a great week of these are the great matchups to go for. So I don't know. What are some of your thoughts on who to go with?
I never have any money left by the time I get to this point anyway. And realistically, the best defense I could find for the value was the Jacksonville Jaguars at $12, against the Osweiler-led, Texans. I mean, they're at home. The weather is supposed to be decent, but I think that Jacksonville's a decent play right there. I mean, Osweiler's not going to light it up, and even if Miller has a good game, he's only going to do so much.
Yeah, I I honestly like the other side of the field. If you go with the Houston Texans against Jacksonville, the Texans don't have a slouchy defense. It's not. It's not. They're not world beaters, especially since J.J. Watt left. But I like. I actually had Houston as one of the teams to maybe use as a streaming defense, because it's never a bad idea to stream against Blake Bortles.
Right.
Because you're looking at a guy that even last year you had this world, not necessarily a world beating season, but in terms of fantasy it was great. But he really didn't play all that well, because he still finished with, 35 touchdowns, and still had 18 interceptions. So he's still throwing an interception a game. So he's still turning over the ball a little bit. I like Houston streaming against Blake Bortles. Again, at only $15, that may still leave you with a little bit to work out the rest of your roster. So. Yeah. All right. I think that's it for our DFS portion. We've covered all the positions. And then finally, we don't have a whole lot of start-sit thing. The main start-sit thing that we've got to cover, I usually do, like I mentioned all the time, I usually do a Q&A for season-long and DFS on Vox DFS. And so just kind of answer their questions on kind of my insight onto players. And this week, had a little bit of a conflict, so I wasn't able to do it. But still, I have them, post questions throughout the week. And so, so far today, we really only had the one question. And Greg, you and I talked about this. So since you are the quarterback guru for Skull King football, I'll let you answer this question. The question was, in terms of who to start this week at quarterback, do you start Trevor Siemian against New Orleans, Jay Cutler against Tampa Bay, or Andy Dalton against the New York Giants? All three of those games are away games for the quarterback.
Yeah, this was a good question. It is a challenging one to look at, and I think there's some traps here. So let's start with Andy Dalton. Number one, this is the Monday night game on the road in New York. If there's quarterbacks that don't traditionally play well in the spotlight, it's Andy Dalton. So he's put up a lot of yards this year for Cincinnati. I think you were saying, Ryan, that he's likely to break the franchise record for yardage in a season this year. But it's only led to 9 touchdowns. I mean, he's not producing a lot from a scoring standpoint, and I don't think that the Giants at home are on Monday night is frankly an environment for him to thrive. That brings us to Jay Cutler, which as we know, if there was no other quarterbacks available in the league, I still wouldn't take Jay Cutler. Even if you get what's called the Jay Cutler game, which is relatively good, you're generally looking at less than 300 yards. You're not getting 3 touchdowns. And then it's going to be a mixed bag out in turnovers between 1 and 5. So in the worst case scenario of a Jay Cutler game, you get sub 300 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3+ turnovers. In a good Jay Cutler game, is give or take 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, and maybe only 1 turnover. Or if you get lucky, it's none. So he's a middle-of-the-road guy. Siemian, who I normally wouldn't pick because I don't think that he's nearly worth the hype that he's gotten, frankly. I mean, I think he's played solid, but he's on an excellent team. Dak Prescott's on an excellent team, and look at the difference in production that's there. And Prescott technically has less experience. He wouldn't sit behind Peyton Manning. So when I look at Siemian, though, New Orleans has such a good offense. They're going to put up points. Denver can't run the ball. Siemian's going to have to throw it. The drawback is he's probably going to turn it over. But I think from a yardage standpoint and a touchdown standpoint, he has more potential than the other two. The upside is there for him, and the upside I don't see with the other two.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just playing the weapons that he has, with Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders going up against a non-existent New Orleans secondary. I mean, there have been issues with Demaryius Thomas. I mean, I have some friends that are Denver fans that think that he should be absolutely booted because of how ineffective he's been, all of his drops and everything. But I mean, to be honest, the guy is talented. He is a physical freak, and can get the job done. But I mean, you look at Cutler. Cutler has, Alshon Jeffrey, and then you're looking at Cameron Meredith and Zach Miller at tight end. Or with Dalton, you've got AJ Green, who's right now a world beater. But then other than that, it's the rookie and Tyler Boyd, who has had a disappointing season for the most part. He does have Tyler Eifert back, but again, the New York Giants defense is a little bit better than, say, the New Orleans defense is. And then it's Brandon LaFell, which, let's be honest, he's had a good couple of games, but I'm not trusting Brandon LaFell at all to put him in any lineup whatsoever. So.
No. I mean, it sounds like he should be in the French Foreign Legion, too.
So, all right. So, I mean, yeah, I definitely see your reasons for going with Trevor Siemian in that game. So, all right. That's all we have for this week. Any more thoughts before we close out the show on this week in fantasy football?
No, just that I really enjoy doing the show because it gives me something to look forward to in football this season between the Bears and Notre Dame and my fantasy team. I would have absolutely nothing if it wasn't for this. And I've already turned to the early games of the NBA and the NHL to try to soothe myself between now and next season or the draft or anything else.
Well, we're planning on making this podcast go through all the playoffs and into the off season, and try to do a little build up into the NFL draft and everything. So hopefully that'll keep you a little bit occupied with some football. All right. Well, again, we want to thank you guys all for listening to the podcast. Again, we are the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast, presented to you by Vox DFS. Vox DFS Firelines and VoxDFS.com. Again, my name is Ryan Scullrud, and with me, Greg Talcott. Go ahead and say bye, Greg.
I was trying to remember who I was, like you were looking at the names.
No.
Good night, everybody.
All right, guys. Have a nice week.